A young woman with dreams bigger than her small town travels west to marry a successful merchant, only to be cruelly rejected for being too plain upon arrival. As whispers spread through the frontier settlement, one man, a rugged mountain guide with his own painful past, sees beyond appearances to the strength and intelligence that others overlook. This is a story about finding your true worth in a world obsessed with false beauty, and how the right person can help you discover that you've been extraordinary all along. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled along the mountain pass, wheels crunching through the last patches of spring snow as it made its final approach to Silvercrest. Inside, Abigail Foster clutched the worn letter in her gloved hands, reading it one last time. Though she had long memorized every word. A successful business requires a respectable wife. Your teaching background suggests intelligence and practical sense. Eager to welcome you to our growing community. The correspondence from Thomas Blackwood, owner of Silvercrest's largest mercantile, had been her lifeline after her father's death left her with mounting debts and few prospects in her Pennsylvania hometown. At 26, Abigail had resigned herself to spinsterhood long ago. The mirror had always shown her the truth. Brown hair neither gloriously blonde nor dramatically dark. Features pleasant but unremarkable, a figure best described as sensible rather than alluring. What she lacked in beauty, she had compensated for with intelligence and dedication, throwing herself into teaching at the local school while caring for her ailing father. But with his passing and the school's closure, options had dwindled rapidly. The newspaper advertisement had seemed providential. Established businessman in Colorado Territory seeks educated Eastern woman for marriage. Position offers security and respect in prosperous mining community. After weeks of correspondence, Thomas Blackwood's letters had convinced her that Silvercrest offered everything Philadelphia could no longer provide: purpose, security, and perhaps, if not passionate love, then at least companionship and mutual respect. "First time to Silvercrest, miss." The driver's gruff voice startled Abigail from her thoughts. She tucked the letter into her reticule, smoothing her best traveling dress, a dove-gray wool that had been turned twice but still maintained its dignity. "Yes," she replied, attempting to keep her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I'm to be married." The driver nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Mail order bride, then. We get a fair number coming through. Some stay, some don't." His cryptic assessment did little to settle her anxiety. As the stagecoach crested the final hill, Silvercrest spread before them in the valley below. Unlike the dirty coal mining towns Abigail had passed through on her journey west, Silvercrest gleamed with purpose and prosperity. Sturdy wooden buildings lined the main street. A white church steeple rose against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains, and in the distance, the entrance to the silver mine that gave the town its name and livelihood bustled with activity. "Almost there, miss." The driver pointed his whip toward a two-story building with a wide porch and large display windows. "That there's Blackwood's Mercantile. Finest establishment between Denver and Salt Lake City, or so Thomas Blackwood will tell anyone who—" "Listen." Abigail's heart quickened. In just moments, she would meet the man whose words had given her hope for a new beginning. She checked her appearance one last time in the small hand mirror from her reticule. Her hair remained neatly pinned. Despite the journey, though dust from the trail had dulled her complexion, there was nothing to be done about it now. Thomas Blackwood would have to accept her as she was. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before the mercantile, and Abigail gathered her courage along with her modest carpet bag. Her trunk containing what remained of her life in Philadelphia would follow later. The driver opened the door, offering his hand as she descended carefully onto the boardwalk. "Good luck to you, miss," he said, with a kindness that suggested he understood the magnitude of her gamble. A small crowd had gathered, as was customary whenever the stagecoach arrived with mail and news from the outside world. Abigail felt their curious stares as she straightened her spine and looked toward the mercantile's entrance. A tall man emerged, well-dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of Eastern refinement rather than Western practicality. His brown hair was impeccably styled, his mustache precisely trimmed. Thomas Blackwood looked exactly as she had imagined from his letters, a man of business, prosperous and proud. "Mr. Blackwood?" Abigail stepped forward, extending her hand with as much confidence as she could muster. "I'm Abigail Foster." Thomas Blackwood's smile faltered as his gaze moved from her face to her simple dress and back again. The warmth in his eyes cooled visibly, and he made no move to take her offered hand. "Miss Foster." His voice held none of the warmth that had characterized his letters. "I had expected someone different." Confusion and the first tendrils of dread crept through Abigail's chest. "I don't understand." "I sent my daguerreotype as requested." The small photographic image had been expensive, but necessary, she'd been told, for a proper mail-order arrangement. "Yes, well." Blackwood cleared his throat, glancing uncomfortably at the onlookers who were now openly watching their exchange. The image was unclear. Perhaps it was the lighting. A woman pushed through the crowd, her silk dress and elaborate hat marking her as someone of importance in the small community. "Thomas, is this her?" Her voice carried, intentionally, loud enough for all to hear. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, Victoria. This is Miss Foster from Philadelphia." Blackwood's tone suggested he was already distancing himself. Victoria, his sister Abigail presumed from the correspondence, made no attempt to hide her disapproval. As she circled Abigail like a predator assessing prey. "She's so plain." The words fell like stones in the sudden silence. "Really, Thomas, what were you thinking? You're the most eligible bachelor in Silvercrest. You need a wife who reflects your standing." The humiliation burned through Abigail, rooting her to the spot as whispers rippled through the gathered townspeople. The journey west had consumed her last savings. There was no money for a return ticket, no home to go back to, even if there had been. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," Blackwood said stiffly, adjusting his cuffs. "I sought a wife who would enhance my social position. Someone who could host gatherings for important investors. Someone who beautiful?" Abigail supplied, finding her voice despite the tightness in her throat. "You should have specified that in your advertisement, Mr. Blackwood." A few titters from the crowd suggested that at least some appreciated her spirit, but Blackwood's expression hardened. "I'll arrange a room at the boarding house for tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss your options." "Options?" Abigail echoed, the word hollow in her mouth. "Perhaps as a clerk in the store, or the mine office needs someone who can keep books." His tone made clear these were consolation prizes, offered more from obligation than kindness. "Good day, Miss Foster." With that, he turned and retreated into the mercantile, his sister following after a final contemptuous glance at Abigail. The crowd began to disperse, leaving her standing alone with her carpet bag and the crushing weight of public rejection. "Don't mind them Blackwoods. Always did put appearance before substance." Abigail turned to find an older woman regarding her with kind eyes. Gray streaked her dark hair, and her practical calico dress spoke of work rather than leisure. "I'm Martha Sullivan. I run the boarding house up the hill." She nodded toward a large, well-kept structure a short distance away. "Thomas already sent word you'd need a room, though he didn't mention why. Now I see." "I apologize if I'm an inconvenience," Abigail began, but Martha waved away her words. "Nonsense. It's the Blackwoods who should apologize. Come along, you. Look dead on your feet, and a hot meal will set things right." Too exhausted and humiliated to argue, Abigail followed Martha up the hill. The boarding house was clean and welcoming, with a large fireplace in the main sitting room and the comforting smell of stew simmering from the kitchen. "Sit yourself down," Martha instructed, guiding Abigail to a chair by the fire. "I'll bring you tea while you warm up." As Martha bustled away, Abigail stared into the flames, the full magnitude of her situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had gambled everything on this journey, and in less than 5 minutes of meeting Thomas Blackwood, her hopes for security and a respectable future had been dashed. "Here you are," Martha returned with tea and fresh bread slathered with butter. "Drink up. Problems never look quite so dire on a full stomach." Abigail accepted the offerings gratefully. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Sullivan." "Martha, please." "And it's not kindness so much as common decency, which seems in short supply down at the mercantile today." Martha settled into the chair opposite. "Now then, tell me your story, and we'll sort out what comes next." So Abigail told her about her father's long illness and death, the debts that forced the sale of their modest home, the school's closure when the new township council decided a female teacher was no longer suitable, and finally the advertisement. That had seemed like providence. "I'm not naive," Abigail concluded, setting down her empty teacup. "I knew it wasn't a love match, but I thought my education and practical skills would be valued. I never imagined that Thomas Blackwood was shallow enough to reject you based on looks alone," Martha snorted. "That man's been getting above himself ever since the mine started turning a profit. Thinks he needs a decorative wife to complete his collection of fine things." The front door opened, bringing a blast of cool mountain air and a man whose presence seemed to fill the room instantly. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly too long around his collar and a beard that looked more practical than fashionable, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His clothes, sturdy trousers, flannel shirt, and a well-worn leather vest, bore the dust of the trail, and the knife sheathed at his belt marked him as someone who spent more time in the wilderness than in town. "Caleb," Martha greeted him warmly. "You're back earlier than expected." "Weather's turning," he replied, his deep voice carrying the slight roughness of someone who didn't use it often. "Storm coming in from the north. Thought it best to get the Hendersons safely home before it hits." His gaze shifted to Abigail, curious but not intrusive. "Caleb Sullivan, my nephew," Martha explained. "Best mountain guide in 3 territories. Caleb, this is Miss Abigail Foster, newly arrived from Philadelphia, ma'am." Caleb nodded respectfully, removing his hat to reveal eyes the color of the Colorado sky, a startling clear blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. "Miss Foster came to marry Thomas Blackwood," Martha continued, a note of disapproval clear in her voice. "But it seems Thomas found her lacking in certain superficial qualities he suddenly deems essential." Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes, followed quickly by a flash of anger he didn't bother to disguise. "Blackwood's a fool," he said simply, the statement carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The unexpected defense from a stranger left Abigail momentarily speechless. Before she could formulate a response, Caleb turned to his aunt. "I'll be heading back out tomorrow. The Wilkinsons need supplies at their homestead. Their youngest has been sickly." He glanced at Abigail again. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Foster. Don't let Blackwood's foolishness color your view of Silvercrest. Some of us see more clearly than others." With a final nod, he disappeared up the stairs, his heavy boots surprisingly quiet on the wooden steps. "That's Caleb," Martha said with obvious affection. Few words, but each one counts. "He seems direct," Abigail observed, still processing the unexpected encounter. "Spends too much time in the mountains to bother with social niceties," Martha agreed. "But there's not a more honest or decent man in these parts. Came to live with me after his parents died in a fever outbreak back east. Was just a boy then, but already had a way about him, seeing things others miss. Martha rose, gathering the empty teacup. You should rest now. Your room's ready upstairs. First door on the left. We'll talk more about your situation in the morning. But remember this. What seems like disaster today might just be redirecting you to where you're meant to be. That night, in the small but comfortable room at Sullivan's boarding house, Abigail stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind rising outside as the promised storm approached. Martha's words echoed in her mind, along with the memory of Caleb Sullivan's blunt assessment. Blackwood's a fool. Cold comfort, perhaps, but in the aftermath of the day's humiliation, it was something to hold on to as sleep finally claimed her. Morning brought clarity along with pale sunshine after the overnight storm. Abigail woke with purpose, if not a plan. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her across the continent. Too plain for Thomas Blackwood she might be, but she was still Abigail Foster, educated, capable, and far from defeated. After washing and dressing in her second-best dress, a practical navy blue that had served her well during teaching days, she made her way downstairs. The dining room was filled with boarders having breakfast before their workday. A middle-aged couple she learned were Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, who ran the town's bakery, two young men who worked as clerks at the assayer's office, and an elderly gentleman introduced as Judge Fletcher, retired but still consulted on legal matters in the region. "Sleep well, dear?" Martha asked, placing a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Better than expected," Abigail admitted. "Has Mr. Blackwood sent any message this morning?" Martha's expression tightened. "Indeed he has. His clerk brought this not 20 minutes ago." She handed Abigail an envelope bearing the mercantile's embossed letterhead. The message inside was brief and to the point. "Miss Foster, upon reflection, I believe our arrangement cannot proceed as planned. I enclose payment for 2 weeks' lodging at Sullivan's and return fare to Philadelphia should you wish to depart. Alternatively, the mine office requires a bookkeeper with education and attention to detail. The position pays $15 monthly with room and board at the company lodging. Please advise of your decision by week's end. T. Blackwood." Abigail folded the letter carefully, weighing her options. Return to Philadelphia with nothing but failure to show for her journey, or remain in Silvercrest, working as a bookkeeper under the shadow of rejection. "Bad news?" Martha inquired gently. "Not unexpected," Abigail replied, explaining the contents. "I suppose I should be grateful for the offer of employment, at least." Judge Fletcher, who had evidently been listening, cleared his throat. "The mine office, eh? Wouldn't recommend it for a lady of refinement. Rough men, rough language, and that Foreman Preston has wandering hands, from what I hear." "There are other possibilities," Martha said thoughtfully. "The school's been without a teacher since old Mr. Barton returned east 3 months ago. The children are running wild, and the town council's been searching for a replacement." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "I have 5 years' experience teaching all grades." "Then you should apply immediately," Judge Fletcher declared. "The council meets this afternoon at the town hall. I'd be happy to introduce you." The prospect of returning to teaching, work she had loved and excelled at, lightened Abigail's heart considerably. "I would be most grateful, Judge Fletcher." As breakfast concluded and the boarders departed for their various occupations, the front door opened to admit Caleb Sullivan, dressed for the trail in buckskins and carrying a large pack. "Heading out to the Wilkinsons?" Martha asked, pouring him coffee. "Need to leave now to beat the next storm," he confirmed, accepting the cup gratefully. His gaze fell on Abigail, and he nodded in greeting. "Miss Foster, decided what you'll do yet?" "I'm applying for the teaching position this afternoon," she replied, surprised by his direct interest in her situation. Something like approval flickered in his blue eyes. "Good. Teaching's important work." More valuable than decorating Blackwood's arm at social functions. The blunt assessment startled a laugh from Abigail. "You don't mince words, Mr. Sullivan." "Caleb," he corrected. "And no, never saw the point. Truth doesn't need dressing up." He hesitated, then added, "The Wilkinsons have 4 children of school age. Bright kids, especially the oldest girl. Been teaching them when I deliver supplies, but they need a proper education." The image of this rugged mountain man teaching isolated children to read touched something in Abigail's heart. "That's very kind of you." He shrugged off the compliment. "Just doing what needs doing." Finishing his coffee, he rose and shouldered his pack. "I'll be back in 3 days. Could tell the Wilkinson Silvercrest might have a real teacher soon." "If you'd like." "Please do," Abigail said, warming to his straightforward manner. "Tell them I hope to meet them soon." With a nod to his aunt and another unreadable glance at Abigail, Caleb departed, leaving the impression of contained energy in his wake. "He likes you," Martha observed once the door closed behind him. "He doesn't know me," Abigail countered, though she felt oddly pleased by the observation. "Caleb makes up his mind quickly about people," Martha replied with certainty. "And he's rarely wrong." That afternoon, dressed in her best remaining outfit and armed with letters of reference she had fortunately packed, Abigail presented herself to the Silvercrest Town Council. The meeting room was modest but well maintained, with 5 council members seated at a long table. Mayor Wilson, a florid man with an impressive mustache. Mrs. Hargrove, owner of the town's only hotel. Mr. Jenkins, who operated the livery stable. Dr. Howard, the town physician. And to Abigail's dismay, Thomas Blackwood. Blackwood's expression darkened when Judge Fletcher ushered her into the room. "Judge, we weren't expecting you today," Mayor Wilson said, clearly surprised. "I've come to introduce Miss Abigail Foster," the judge announced formally. "She's applying for the vacant teaching position." Blackwood immediately objected. "Miss Foster arrived yesterday to fulfill a personal arrangement with me, an arrangement that proved unsuitable. I fail to see how that affects her qualifications as a teacher," Judge Fletcher replied smoothly. "Miss Foster has 5 years' experience in Philadelphia and comes with excellent references. May I see those references?" Dr. Howard asked, extending his hand. As the letters were passed around the table, Abigail stood straight and answered questions about her teaching methods, experience with different age groups, and approach to discipline. Throughout the interview, she was acutely aware of Blackwood's hostile gaze, but refused to be intimidated. While Miss Foster's credentials appear in order, Blackwood finally interjected, "I must question whether someone who would agree to a mail-order marriage has the moral character to shape our children's minds." A tense silence followed the accusation. Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks, but maintained her composure. "Mr. Blackwood, my agreement to marry you was born of necessity after my father's death left me with few options. However, my decision to seek employment rather than proceed with a marriage where I'm not wanted demonstrates, I believe, sound judgment rather than questionable morals." Mrs. Hargrove, who had been quietly observing, suddenly laughed. "Well said, Miss Foster. And as the only woman on this council, I'd like to note that many of our most respected citizens began their Western lives through mail-order arrangements, myself included." This revelation clearly surprised Blackwood, whose mouth opened and closed without producing sound. "I believe we've heard enough," Mayor Wilson concluded. "All in favor of offering Miss Foster the teaching position, effective immediately?" 4 hands raised, with only Blackwood abstaining. The vote confirmed. Abigail was officially appointed as Silvercrest's new schoolteacher at a salary of $30 monthly, with quarters provided in the small cabin behind the schoolhouse. As she left the town hall, her heart lighter than it had been since arriving in Silvercrest, Abigail nearly collided with Victoria Blackwood, who had evidently been waiting outside. "So you've wormed your way into staying after all, Victoria," said coldly. Don't think this changes anything. You'll always be the woman my brother rejected." Rather than feel stung, Abigail found herself pitying the other woman. Perhaps. But I'd rather be rejected for my appearance, which I cannot help, than for my character, which I can. "Good day, Miss Blackwood." Walking away with her head high, Abigail realized something important had shifted within her. The humiliation of Blackwood's rejection no longer weighed so heavily. Instead, she felt the first stirrings of gratitude that his shallow judgment had freed her to pursue work she loved. Martha was delighted with the news. Wonderful! The school's been closed too long. Those children need structure and learning. "I can move into the teacher's cabin tomorrow," Abigail said as they shared tea in the boarding house parlor. "The mayor gave me the key and said it needs only cleaning before it's habitable." "I'll help," Martha offered immediately. "And I'm sure some of the mothers will too. Once word spreads, we've got a teacher again." True to Martha's prediction, the next morning brought not only Abigail and Martha to the small cabin behind the schoolhouse, but also 5 women from town, armed with brooms, mops, and determined expressions. By midday, the cabin had been transformed from a dusty, neglected space to a cozy home with freshly washed curtains, a pantry stocked with basics, and even a vase of wildflowers on the small table. "The school needs work too," observed Mrs. Peterson, as they took a break for lunch. "Desks are all pushed against the walls, and there's dust an inch thick on everything." "We'll tackle that next," Martha declared. "School should start Monday, which gives us tomorrow to get it in order." As the women discussed plans for the schoolhouse renovation, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway, Caleb Sullivan, looking trail-worn but alert. "Thought you weren't due back for 3 days," Martha said, surprised. "Made good time," he replied, his gaze taking in the transformed cabin before settling on Abigail. "Heard in town you got the teaching job. Came to see if you needed help getting settled." The thoughtfulness of his arrival, especially after what must have been an exhausting journey, touched Abigail deeply. "That's very kind, Mr. Sullivan. Caleb, we were just discussing the schoolhouse itself. It apparently needs considerable work before Monday. I'll handle it," he said simply. "Got some friends who owe me favors. We'll have it ready by tomorrow night." And so began Abigail Foster's new life in Silvercrest, not as Mrs. Thomas Blackwood, merchant's wife, but as Miss Foster, the schoolteacher who had overcome public rejection to find her place in the community. It wasn't the future she had traveled west expecting, but as she stood before 28 eager faces on that first Monday morning, she couldn't help feeling that perhaps Martha had been right after all. What had seemed like disaster might indeed have been redirection to exactly where she was meant to be. The schoolhouse bell rang across Silvercrest, its clear tone signaling the end of another successful day of learning. Abigail Foster gathered her books and papers as her students hurried out into the spring sunshine, their voices carrying back through the open windows. 1 month had passed since she had first stood before these children, a stranger determined to prove her worth despite Thomas Blackwood's very public rejection. "Miss Foster?" A small voice pulled her from her thoughts. 10-year-old Lucy Wilkinson stood hesitantly in the doorway, clutching a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Yes, Lucy?" Abigail smiled warmly at the girl whose family lived far up in the mountains, one of the homesteads Caleb Sullivan regularly visited. "Ma sent these for you." Lucy placed the bundle on Abigail's desk, unfolding it to reveal a half-dozen perfectly stitched handkerchiefs, each embroidered with delicate wildflowers. "She says thank you for the books Mr. Sullivan brought us last week. My brothers are already reading the adventure stories." "They're beautiful," Abigail said sincerely, running her fingers over the fine needlework. "Please thank your mother for me. And you should be proud. Your reading has improved tremendously this month." Lucy beamed at the praise. "Mr. Sullivan helped us practice when he stayed with us during the snowmelt. He says reading opens doors." The mention of Caleb brought an involuntary warmth to Abigail's cheeks. Since helping restore the schoolhouse, He had become an unexpected ally in her educational mission, bringing books and supplies to remote homesteads and encouraging parents to send their children to school whenever possible. "Mr. Sullivan is." "Right," Abigail agreed, walking Lucy to the door where the girl's oldest brother waited patiently. "I'll see you tomorrow, and thank you again for the gift." As the Wilkinson children headed home, Abigail turned back to the schoolroom, surveying it with pride. The space had been transformed under Caleb's direction. Desks arranged in neat rows, walls adorned with maps and educational charts, bookshelves stocked with donated volumes from townspeople eager to support the school's reopening. Even the blackboard had been replaced, the old cracked surface swapped for smooth new slate that made her chalk lessons clearly visible from every seat. Gathering her materials for the next day's lessons, Abigail reflected on how quickly Silvercrest had begun to feel like home. After that disastrous first day, when Thomas Blackwood had pronounced her too plain for his requirements, she had expected months of sidelong glances and whispered gossip. Instead, the community, or at least most of it, had embraced her with surprising warmth. The Blackwood siblings remained the exception. Thomas avoided her entirely, crossing the street when he saw her approaching. Victoria was worse, making pointed comments within Abigail's hearing about appropriate standards and knowing one's place. Their rejection stung less with each passing day, though Abigail occasionally caught herself wondering what might have been if Thomas had seen beyond her unremarkable appearance. A knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted her reflections. Caleb Sullivan stood in the entrance, his tall frame nearly filling the doorway. As always, his presence brought an immediate energy to the room, like a current of mountain air sweeping through the stillness. "Lessons finished for the day?" he asked, removing his hat. Abigail nodded, suddenly conscious of loose strands of hair that had escaped her practical bun during the day's activities. "Just preparing for tomorrow. The children are making excellent progress with their geography studies." Caleb stepped inside, glancing at the large wall map where colored pins marked important cities and territories. "Teaching them about places beyond these mountains is important work. Most of their parents have never seen anything but Colorado." "Like you?" Abigail asked, realizing she knew little about his background, despite their increasing acquaintance. A ghost of a smile touched his bearded face. "I wasn't always a mountain man, Miss Foster. Attended university in Boston before the war. Studied engineering." This revelation startled her. Though she had sensed intelligence behind his laconic manner, she had never imagined formal education. "Boston? What brought you west?" Something darkened in his blue eyes. "War has a way of changing a man's path. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach cities anymore. Too many ghosts." Understanding bloomed in Abigail's heart. So many men had returned from the conflict changed or broken. That Caleb had found purpose in these mountains spoke to his resilience. "I'm sorry," she said simply. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "It was a lifetime ago. Found my place here." Changing the subject, he added, "Actually came to ask a favor. The Wilkinsons' oldest boy, James, he has a gift for mathematics. Been teaching him what I can, but he's already beyond my knowledge. Wondered if you might lend me some advanced text to take on my next visit." "Of course," Abigail replied, touched by his commitment to the isolated family. "I have several that might be suitable. And Lucy brought me a lovely gift today from Mrs. Wilkinson." She showed him the embroidered handkerchiefs. Caleb examined them with genuine appreciation. "Sarah Wilkinson has the finest needlework in the territory. Been trading her embroidery for supplies since her husband hurt his back in the mine collapse 2 years ago." This mention of the mine reminded Abigail of something that had been puzzling her. "Caleb, why does Thomas Blackwood have such influence in Silvercrest? I understand he owns the mercantile, but the way people defer to him seems excessive." Caleb's expression hardened. Blackwood owns more than the store. He holds the notes on half the businesses in town, including the mine. When silver was discovered here 10 years ago, his father loaned money to start operations. When old man Blackwood died, Thomas inherited everything and expanded his control. Now he's leveraging that power to court Eastern investors, trying to turn Silvercrest into some kind of sophisticated outpost that will impress his business associates. And a plain wife didn't fit that vision, Abigail concluded, the final piece clicking into place. His loss, Caleb said with unexpected intensity. Man's a fool who judges worth by appearance. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, clearing his throat. About those mathematics books. After selecting appropriate texts, Abigail walked with Caleb toward Martha's boarding house where she still took her evening meals, having developed a genuine friendship with the older woman. The late afternoon sun bathed Silvercrest in golden light, the mountain air crisp and invigorating after the schoolroom's chalk dust. "Will you join us for supper?" Abigail asked as they neared the boarding house. "Martha always says you're too thin when you return from your journeys." Caleb's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. "My aunt worries too much. But yes, I'd be glad to join you." Martha's delight at seeing her nephew was evident as she ushered them into the Faigo dining room where several other boarders were already gathered. Judge Fletcher occupied his usual place at the table's head, engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Howard about a legal dispute involving water rights. The Peterson couple discussed their bakery's business while young Mr. Collins, the telegraph operator, listened attentively. "Caleb, just in time," Martha exclaimed. "I've made venison stew your favorite." Conversation flowed easily through the meal, with Abigail sharing amusing anecdotes from the schoolroom and Judge Fletcher recounting tales from his early days as a circuit judge. Throughout the evening, Abigail found herself increasingly aware of Caleb's quiet presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his tall frame, the way his rare smile transformed his serious features, how he listened intently to each speaker with genuine interest. As coffee was served, Mr. Collins cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Foster, I've been meaning to ask. There's a social dance planned for next Saturday at the town hall. Would you consider attending as my partner?" The unexpected invitation brought conversation to a momentary halt. Abigail felt Caleb tense slightly beside her, though his expression remained impassive. "That's very kind, Mr. Collins," she replied carefully. "But I fear I'm not much of a dancer." "Nonsense," Martha interjected. "Everyone enjoys the monthly social. It's one of Silvercrest's few civilized entertainments." "Indeed," added Judge Fletcher. "Even I managed to shuffle through a waltz or two, despite these old bones." "You should attend, Miss Foster. A good opportunity to meet families outside your school circle." Finding no graceful way to decline, Abigail nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I would be pleased to attend." The young man's face lit with obvious pleasure, while beside her, Caleb remained silent, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. Later, as boarders dispersed to their evening activities, Abigail found herself alone on the porch with Caleb. The mountain twilight painted the sky in deepening shades of purple and blue, the first stars appearing like distant pinpricks in the darkening canvas. "You don't have to accept Collins if you don't want to," Caleb said abruptly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Town socials aren't obligations." Abigail turned to study his profile, strong and weathered against the evening sky. "Are you suggesting I shouldn't go?" "Just saying you have a choice." His tone was carefully neutral. "Collins is a good man, reliable, steady position at the telegraph office." Something about his detached assessment sparked irritation in Abigail. "Are you evaluating his suitability as a suitor, Mr. Sullivan? I thought you of all people wouldn't judge someone's worth by their position or prospects." Caleb's eyes widened slightly at her sharp response. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He ran a hand through his dark hair, uncharacteristically. Flustered, just that. You shouldn't feel obligated. After Blackwood, you might want time before. Before what? Considering another man? Abigail shook her head, frustrated by his presumption. I came to Silvercrest expecting marriage to a stranger. While I'm grateful events turned out differently, I'm not some fragile creature whose heart was broken. My arrangement with Thomas Blackwood was practical, not romantic. And Collins? Caleb asked, his voice dropping lower. Is he practical too? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to address. Abigail took a steadying breath, moderating her tone. Mr. Collins was kind enough to offer companionship at a social event. Nothing more. I accepted because refusing publicly would have been unkind. She paused, then added more gently, I appreciate your concern, Caleb, but I'm capable of managing my own affairs. His expression softened. Never doubted that. You've proven yourself stronger than most men I know, coming alone to a strange place and building a new life after Blackwood's rejection. After a moment, he added, will you save a dance for me? If I make it back from the Henderson place in time. The request, delivered with uncharacteristic uncertainty, melted Abigail's irritation instantly. Of course. Though I should warn you, I truly am a terrible dancer. His rare smile appeared, transforming his rugged features. That makes two of us. We can step on each other's toes in companionable misery. The week leading to the social passed quickly, filled with school duties and preparations. Several of Abigail's female students stayed after classes to help decorate the schoolroom for an upcoming parents' visitation day, hanging student artwork and carefully lettered compositions on the walls. Miss Foster called 12-year-old Emma Peterson as she arranged a display of arithmetic exercises. Is it true you're going to the social with Mr. Collins from the telegraph office? News traveled quickly in Silvercrest, especially among the school-aged population. Mr. Collins has kindly offered to escort me, Abigail confirmed, helping another student straighten a crooked geography map. My May says you could do better, Emma continued with the unfiltered honesty of youth. She says half the unmarried men in town would court you if they weren't scared of Mr. Sullivan. Abigail nearly dropped the map she was holding. I beg your pardon? Emma nodded sagely. Ma says Mr. Sullivan watches over you like a bear guarding honey, and most men value their skin too much to risk it. That's quite enough, Emma, Abigail said firmly, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Sullivan is simply being neighborly because his aunt is my friend. The girl exchanged knowing glances with her companions, but said nothing more, leaving Abigail to wonder just how much of the town was speculating about her relationship. With Caleb, Saturday arrived with perfect spring weather, the mountain air crisp but comfortable. Having no appropriate dance attire among her practical teaching clothes, Abigail had reluctantly accepted Martha's offer to alter a dress belonging to her late daughter, a simple but elegant blue silk that brought out the gray in Abigail's eyes. Sarah would be pleased to see it worn again, Martha assured her as she made final adjustments to the hemline. It's been packed away too long. It's far too fine for me, Abigail protested, unused to such luxury against her skin. Her teaching salary provided necessities but left little for adornments. Nonsense, Martha countered, securing the last stitch. Every woman deserves to feel beautiful occasionally. Even practical schoolteachers. Beautiful was not a word Abigail had ever associated with herself. Plain, sensible, intelligent. These were the descriptors she had accepted long ago. Yet as she studied her reflection in Martha's mirror, she hardly recognized a woman gazing back. The blue silk complemented her coloring in a way her usual browns and grays never had, while Martha's skilled alterations emphasized her slender waist and graceful neck. There, Martha said with satisfaction. Let Thomas Blackwood see what he rejected. I doubt Mr. Blackwood will notice, Abigail replied, though privately she couldn't help wondering what his reaction might be. Mr. Collins arrived promptly at 7, dressed in his Sunday best, his usual nervous manner amplified by the occasion. He complimented Abigail's appearance with sincere admiration as he escorted her to the town hall, where lanterns already illuminated the gathering crowd. The hall had been transformed for the social, with benches pushed against walls, colorful. Bunting hung from rafters and a small area designated for the three-piece band: piano, fiddle, and guitar. Nearly everyone in Silvercrest seemed to be in attendance, from miners still washing, coal dust from their fingernails, to the town's more prosperous citizens in their finery. Thomas and Victoria Blackwood held court near the refreshment table, surrounded by associates from the mine office and their wives. Victoria spotted Abigail immediately, her eyes narrowing as she whispered something to her brother. Thomas turned, his expression registering shock as he took in Abigail's transformed appearance. "Miss Foster." Mayor Wilson approached, saving Abigail from acknowledging the Blackwoods directly. "A pleasure to see our schoolteacher joining community festivities. The children speak highly of you, even my grandson Timothy, who previously considered education a form of torture." "Timothy has a keen mind for science," Abigail replied, warming to the subject of her students. "His questions about geology are quite advanced." As they chatted, more townspeople approached to welcome Abigail, many introducing family members she hadn't yet met through the school. Mr. Collins remained attentively by her side, though his conversational contributions were limited primarily to nervous nods of agreement. The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to form for the first dance. Mr. Collins led Abigail onto the floor, his hand trembling slightly as it rested at her waist. Despite her warning about her dancing abilities, they managed reasonably well, though Abigail found herself counting steps under her breath to maintain the rhythm. As the evening progressed, Abigail danced with several partners: Judge Fletcher, who moved with surprising grace for his age; Dr. Howard, who kept up a running commentary on the medicinal benefits of physical activity; and even young Mr. Peterson from the bakery, whose enthusiasm compensated for his lack of coordination. During a brief respite, Martha appeared at Abigail's side with a cup of punch. "Having a good time?" "Better than expected," Abigail admitted, gratefully accepting the cool drink. "Though I fear Mr. Collins is disappointed that I've been claimed by so many partners." Martha snorted softly. Collins knew what he was doing. Being seen escorting the prettiest woman in the room raises a man standing. Her gaze shifted to the doorway, and she smiled. "Well, look who's decided to join civilization for the evening." Abigail turned to see Caleb Sullivan entering the hall, and her heart performed an unexpected flutter. He had clearly made an effort for the occasion, trading his usual buckskins for dark trousers and a proper shirt, his hair combed neatly and beard trimmed. He still looked more comfortable in wilderness gear, but the formal clothes emphasized his broad shoulders and height in a way that drew appreciative glances from several unattached women. His eyes scanned the room until they found Abigail, and then he moved purposefully toward her, nodding acknowledgments to greetings, but not stopping to chat. "You made it back," Abigail said as he reached them, inexplicably pleased by his appearance. "Just returned an hour ago." His gaze took in her appearance, lingering for a moment before returning to her face. "You look different." Martha rolled her eyes at her nephew's lack of eloquence. "The word you're searching for is beautiful, Caleb." A hint of color touched his tanned cheeks. "I was going to say exactly like herself, only in blue silk." The simple honesty of his response affected Abigail more deeply than any practiced compliment. Before she could reply, the band began a waltz, and Caleb extended his hand. "I believe you promised me a dance, Miss Foster." As they moved onto the floor, Abigail was acutely aware of curious eyes following them, including Thomas Blackwood's stormy gaze from across the room. Caleb's hand was warm and steady at her waist, his other engulfing hers with surprising gentleness for a man who wrestled mountain paths and wild animals. "You clean up well, Mr. Sullivan," she observed, finding her voice as they began to move. "With the music. Felt I should make an effort, given the company." His steps were sure, contradicting his earlier claim of dancing incompetence. "How has your evening been?" "Pleasant enough. The community has been very welcoming." Caleb's mouth quirked. "Noticed Blackwood watching you all evening. Seems to be reconsidering his hasty judgment." Abigail followed his gaze to where Thomas stood with narrowed eyes, his expression a mixture of annoyance and something that might have been regret. "It doesn't matter what he thinks anymore." "Good," Caleb said with quiet intensity, "because his opinion never should have mattered in the first place." They danced in companionable silence for several measures before Caleb spoke again. "The Hendersons' little girl asked about you. Said she wants to come to school, but her father thinks it's too far to travel daily. How old is she?" 8. Bright as a new penny. Taught herself to read from an old Bible and some newspapers. Abigail considered this. "Perhaps we could arrange weekly lessons? She could stay with someone in town during school days. My aunt might accommodate her," Caleb suggested. "Martha's always looking for young company." As they discussed possibilities, Abigail realized how naturally they had fallen into partnership on matters concerning the community's children. Caleb's genuine interest in their education and welfare matched her own commitment, creating an easy collaboration that felt increasingly important to her. The dance ended too soon, and Mr. Collins approached to reclaim his partner for the next set. Caleb relinquished her with obvious reluctance but impeccable manners, stepping back with a slight bow. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Foster. Perhaps another later, if your card isn't full." Before she could respond, a commotion near the refreshment table drew everyone's attention. Thomas Blackwood was engaged in heated conversation with a well-dressed stranger, a tall man with silver at his temples and an air of authority that commanded attention even across the crowded room. "Who is that?" Abigail asked as the stranger's voice rose above the music. "Edward Hamilton," Caleb replied, his expression darkening. "Railroad investor from Denver. Blackwood's been courting him for months, trying to secure funds for a spur line to Silvercrest." The confrontation escalated, with Hamilton gesturing emphatically while Blackwood attempted to calm him without success. Finally, the investor turned on his heel and stormed from the hall, leaving a visible wake of whispers and speculation behind him. "That can't be good for Blackwood's grand plans," Mr. Collins observed with undisguised interest. As the evening continued, Abigail found herself claimed for another dance by Caleb, who had been watching from the sidelines while declining several hopeful partners. This time, they moved to a slower melody that required less concentration, allowing more comfortable conversation. "Hamilton's departure has caused quite a stir," Abigail noted, observing the clusters of people still discussing the incident while Thomas Blackwood had disappeared entirely. Caleb nodded grimly. "Town's future depends on that railroad connection. Without it, the mine's expansion stalls and half the businesses here suffer." "Is that why Blackwood has been so focused on creating the appearance of civilization? To impress investors?" "Precisely. He believes Silvercrest needs to project sophistication to attract Eastern money. Hence his desire for an ornamental wife. To complete the picture." Caleb's hand tightened slightly at her waist, as if real worth could be measured by appearance. The intensity in his voice drew Abigail's gaze to his face, where she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken. For a breathless moment, the crowded room seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them in a private world of unspoken possibility. The spell broke as the music ended. Caleb released her reluctantly, stepping back as propriety demanded, though his eyes never left hers. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Foster." "Abigail," she corrected softly. "I think, after all this time, you might call me Abigail when we're not in school." His rare smile appeared, warming his blue eyes. "Abigail, then. And I should warn you, Martha has plans to send you home with enough leftovers to feed you. For a week, she thinks teaching has made you too thin." This domestic concern from his usually practical aunt made Abigail laugh. "Martha seems determined to take care of everyone in her orbit." "Family trait," Caleb replied with unexpected seriousness. "We protect what matters to us." As Mr. Collins approached once more, claiming Abigail for the final dance of the evening, she carried Caleb's words with her like a talisman. Despite arriving in Silvercrest under the shadow of rejection, she had somehow found people who valued her for exactly who she was, not for her appearance or lack thereof, but for her character, intelligence, and heart. Thomas Blackwood's assessment of her as too plain no longer stung as it once had. Instead, she felt something like gratitude that his shallow judgment had freed her to discover her true place in this mountain community, not as an ornament on a successful merchant's arm, but as herself, Miss Abigail Foster, schoolteacher, respected for her own merits and growing more confident with each passing day. Summer transformed Silvercrest, painting the surrounding mountains with wildflowers, and drawing children to the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse during their free hours. 2 months had passed since the social dance, and Abigail found herself settled into a rhythm that brought unexpected contentment. Her classroom had expanded to 34 students, including little Grace Henderson, who now stayed with Martha during the week as they had arranged. On this particular afternoon, Abigail dismissed her pupils early, unable to compete with the perfect June weather that beckoned through open windows. As the last child departed, she gathered essays to grade and stepped outside, intending to work in the dappled shade of the large pine tree beside the school. The spot had become her favorite retreat, close enough to her small cabin to be convenient, yet far enough from town to provide peaceful solitude. "Miss Foster." Abigail turned to see Victoria Blackwood approaching, her elaborate dress and parasol incongruously formal against the rustic schoolyard. "He has graciously returned to continue discussions regarding Silvercrest's railroad connection." Understanding dawned. The investor's dramatic exit had indeed been significant, potentially catastrophic for the town's economic future. But why was she being involved in what appeared to be business negotiations? "I'm honored to make your acquaintance, Mr. Hamilton," Abigail said carefully, "though I confess I'm uncertain how I might contribute to railroad discussions." Hamilton's stern features relaxed into something approaching a smile, directly to the point, refreshing. He turned to Blackwood. "You were correct about her directness, at least." Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Foster, Mr. Hamilton has expressed specific interest in Silvercrest's educational facilities as part of his assessment of our community's viability for long-term investment." "I have a particular interest in education," Hamilton elaborated. "My late wife was a teacher before our marriage. I've found that communities with strong schools tend to be more stable, more forward-thinking, and consequently, better investment opportunities." Now the situation became clear. The railroad connection that Blackwood coveted, that the entire town needed, apparently hinged partly on Abigail's ability to demonstrate Silvercrest's educational credentials. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman Thomas had deemed unsuitable, as his wife was now critical to his business ambitions. "I would be pleased to show you our schoolhouse, Mr. Hamilton," she offered. "Though I should warn you, it's quite modest compared to Denver's facilities. It's not the building that interests me, Miss Foster, but the quality of instruction." Hamilton's assessing gaze hadn't wavered. "In fact, I'd prefer to observe a regular school day rather than a special presentation." Mayor Wilson looked alarmed. "Mr. Hamilton leaves tomorrow morning. Perhaps a brief overview this afternoon would—" "I can delay my departure by 1 day," Hamilton interrupted firmly. "I'll observe tomorrow's classes if that's agreeable to Miss Foster." All eyes turned to Abigail, the unspoken pressure palpable. An entire community's future seemingly rested on her shoulders and her classroom performance. Of course, she agreed with more confidence than she felt. You're welcome to observe our full day of instruction, from 8 o'clock until 3. Hamilton nodded approvingly. Excellent. I look forward to it. As the men returned to their discussion of technical matters, Abigail excused herself, mind already racing with preparations needed before tomorrow's impromptu inspection. She was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with Caleb Sullivan outside. The mercantile. Whoa there, he said, steadying her with gentle hands on her shoulders. Where's the fire? The solid presence of her friend, for surely that's what he had become over these months, immediately calmed her racing thoughts. Mr. Hamilton is observing my class tomorrow. Apparently, Silvercrest's railroad connection depends partly on his approval of our educational standards. Understanding dawned in Caleb's blue eyes. Ah, Blackwood must be beside himself, needing your help after rejecting you so publicly. He seemed uncomfortable, Abigail admitted, unable to suppress a smile at the memory of Thomas's strained expression. Serves him right. Caleb fell into step beside her as she walked toward the school. But you don't need to worry. Your teaching would impress anyone with sense. His confidence in her abilities warmed Abigail more than she cared to admit. Over the past months, Caleb had become her most reliable supporter, from building bookshelves for her growing classroom library to escorting her on educational expeditions to nearby geological formations with her older students. His quiet strength and unwavering belief in her had become foundations she hadn't realized she was building upon. I hope you're right, she said. The entire town seems to be counting on me. They should be. You've done more for these children in a few months than Silvercrest managed in years before you arrived. His matter-of-fact tone made the praise all the more meaningful. What can I do to help? The immediate offer of assistance touched her deeply. I need to organize specimen collections for our natural science lesson, and perhaps rearrange the classroom for better observation. Consider it done. No hesitation, no qualification, just simple support that asked nothing in return. They spent the remainder of the afternoon preparing the schoolroom, working in companionable efficiency as Caleb moved heavy desks and assembled display tables for geological samples he had collected from various elevations. By sunset, the classroom had been transformed into a showcase of frontier education at its finest, with student work prominently displayed and learning materials strategically arranged. It looks perfect, Abigail declared, surveying their work with satisfaction. Thank you, Caleb. I couldn't have managed all this alone. You'd have found a way, he replied with that quiet certainty that characterized his faith in her. But I'm glad to help. As they locked the schoolhouse, the setting sun painted Silvercrest's buildings in golden light, the mountain backdrop majestic against the deepening sky. The beauty of the moment struck Abigail forcefully, not just the natural splendor surrounding them, but the sense of belonging she had found in this place she'd come to as a stranger. Would you join me for supper? She asked impulsively. I have a stew simmering in my cabin. Nothing fancy, but there's plenty. Surprise and pleasure crossed Caleb's features. I'd like that. The simple meal in Abigail's modest cabin marked a subtle shift in their relationship, the first time they had dined alone together, without Martha's presence or the formality of the boarding house. Conversation flowed easily as they discussed everything from educational theories to wilderness survival techniques. Caleb spoke more than usual, sharing stories of his engineering studies and explaining how those skills served him in navigating the challenging mountain terrain. Why didn't you continue with engineering after the war? Abigail asked as they lingered over coffee. You clearly have the aptitude in training. Caleb's expression grew distant. Cities felt confining after what I'd seen. Too many people. Too much noise. The mountains offered silence and space to heal. He paused, then added quietly, and truth be told, I needed work that made immediate, tangible sense. Building trail markers that keep travelers alive. Delivering supplies that prevent starvation. Simple purpose, clear results. Abigail nodded, understanding. Teaching gives me similar clarity. Each child who masters reading or grasps a difficult concept, it's immediate evidence that what I'm doing matters. It matters more than you know. Caleb's gaze held hers with unusual intensity. You've changed this town, Abigail. Not just the children, but the community itself. People talk about the future differently now, with more hope. The praise embarrassed and pleased her simultaneously. I merely do my job, with extraordinary heart. The simple declaration hung between them, loaded with meaning that neither seemed ready to articulate fully. After a moment, Caleb rose. Reluctantly, I should go. You need rest before tomorrow's performance. It's not a performance, Abigail protested as she walked him to the door. Just an ordinary school day with an extraordinary observer. Hamilton will be impressed, Caleb predicted with absolute confidence. And Blackwood will be forced to acknowledge publicly that the woman he rejected as too plain for his purposes is essential to his precious railroad ambitions. The observation brought a smile to Abigail's lips. There would be a certain poetic justice in that, wouldn't there? Caleb's answering smile transformed his rugged features. Sleep well, Abigail. Tomorrow you'll remind everyone in Silvercrest exactly how exceptional you truly are. His words followed her into dreams that night, a reassuring counterpoint to her lingering anxiety about Hamilton's inspection. Morning arrived with perfect weather, sunlight streaming through schoolhouse windows as Abigail made final preparations. Students filed in precisely at 8 o'clock, unusually subdued after stern warnings from parents about the importance of good behavior during Mr. Hamilton's visit. The investor himself arrived moments later, accompanied by Thomas Blackwood, whose nervous expression contrasted sharply with Hamilton's impassive assessment. Please proceed exactly as you normally would, Miss Foster, Hamilton instructed, taking a seat at the back of the room. Pretend I'm not here. Easier said than done, Abigail thought, but she launched into the day's lessons with determined professionalism. Beginning with reading exercises for the younger children while older students worked on composition, she moved through arithmetic, geography, and history before lunch. Throughout the morning, she maintained the balanced approach she had developed. Firm but kind, demanding yet encouraging, adapting her methods to each child's needs and abilities. Hamilton observed everything with careful attention, occasionally making notes but offering no indication of his assessment. Thomas Blackwood remained for the first hour before departing for the mercantile, clearly uncomfortable watching Abigail command the classroom with such natural authority. After the lunch break came Abigail's most ambitious lesson, natural sciences, featuring the specimen collections she and Caleb had arranged. Students moved between stations examining rocks, plants, and simple mechanical demonstrations of physical principles. The hands-on approach engaged even the most restless children, their excitement palpable as they recorded observations in journals Abigail had created for each of them. Who assembled these geological samples? Hamilton asked, approaching. Her students worked independently. They're quite comprehensive. Mr. Sullivan collected most of them, Abigail explained. He's particularly knowledgeable about the region's natural features. The mountain guide? Interesting. Hamilton examined a quartz specimen thoughtfully. I've heard he attended university before the war. Engineering at Boston College, Abigail confirmed, surprised by Hamilton's knowledge of Caleb's background. Promising career sacrificed to the conflict, like so many others. Hamilton's expression softened momentarily. Yet he's found purpose here, it seems. The observation struck Abigail as unusually perceptive for someone who had spent so little time in Silvercrest. Before she could respond, a commotion at the schoolhouse door drew their attention. Victoria Blackwood stood in the entrance, her expression even more pinched than usual. "Miss Foster," she announced without preamble, "you're needed immediately at the mine. There's been an accident." A ripple of alarm passed through the students, many of whom had fathers or brothers working in the silver mine that was Silvercrest's economic foundation. "What kind of accident?" Abigail asked, already moving to gather first aid supplies she kept in the classroom. Her medical knowledge was basic, but often needed in a frontier town with only one overworked doctor. "A collapse in the new tunnel," Victoria replied grimly. "Several men are injured. Dr. Howard requests any assistance available while rescue operations continue." Hamilton stepped forward decisively. "Class is dismissed for the day. Children with family at the mine may accompany us. Others should return home immediately." His tone brooked no argument as he turned to Abigail. "I'll help you carry supplies." "Miss Foster." The calm efficiency with which he took charge impressed Abigail, who had expected a businessman to be useless in a crisis. Within minutes, they were hurrying toward the mine entrance at the edge of town, several older students whose fathers worked below ground following anxiously. The scene at the mine was controlled chaos. Miners not involved in the collapse worked frantically to shore up the entrance to the damaged tunnel, while others carried injured men to a makeshift treatment area, where Dr. Howard labored over the most serious cases. Thomas Blackwood stood with the mine foreman, both men looking grim as they studied structural diagrams spread on a rough table. "How many still trapped?" Hamilton asked as they approached, setting down Abigail's supply box. "At least 5 men." Thomas replied, clearly surprised by the investor's presence. "Including James Wilkinson." Abigail's heart sank. James was the father of 2 of her students, a quiet, hard-working man still recovering from a previous mining injury. "How stable is the tunnel?" The foreman shook his head. "That's the problem. We need to reinforce before sending in rescuers, or we risk another collapse that could kill everyone." "But that will take hours," Abigail protested, thinking of the trapped men potentially injured and running out of air. "We don't have a choice," Thomas insisted. "We need a structural engineer, and the nearest is in Denver." "You have one here," came a familiar voice as Caleb Sullivan strode into the clearing, already removing his coat. "Boston College, class of '59. Now give me those diagrams." Thomas looked skeptical, but Hamilton nodded sharply. "Sullivan's right. Let him assess the situation." While Caleb examined the tunnel diagrams with the foreman, Abigail joined Dr. Howard, putting her limited medical knowledge to use bandaging less serious injuries and providing water to dust-covered miners. The doctor looked exhausted, having been awake since the previous day, attending a difficult birth, before being called to the mine disaster. "Thank God you're here," he told Abigail as she assisted with a compound fracture. "I can't manage all these men alone. What can I do for him?" she asked, indicating the injured miner whose leg bone had broken through skin. "Hold him still while I set the bone," Dr. Howard instructed, impressed by her steady hands and calm demeanor under pressure. For the next hour, Abigail worked alongside the doctor, learning as she assisted and applying her natural intelligence to medical challenges she had never anticipated facing. Throughout, she was acutely aware of Caleb's focused intensity as he developed a rescue plan, directing miners to gather specific materials and prepare temporary support structures of his design. "It's risky," she overheard him telling Thomas and Hamilton, "but mathematically sound. We can create a stable passage for rescuers to reach the trapped men without triggering another collapse. And if you're wrong?" Thomas demanded, clearly uncomfortable with entrusting lives to the mountain guide he had long dismissed as unimportant. "Then I'll be the first one buried," Caleb replied simply. "I'll lead the rescue team myself." The matter-of-fact courage of his statement sent a chill through Abigail. Before she could process her reaction, Victoria Blackwood appeared at her side, surprisingly helpful as she organized clean bandages. "Sullivan's going into that death trap," Victoria observed, watching Caleb assemble the rescue team. "Always. Knew he was either the bravest or the most foolish man in Silvercrest." "He knows what he's doing," Abigail defended, her voice sharper than intended. "He's trained for exactly this kind of structural challenge." Victoria gave her a sidelong glance that contained more perception than Abigail had credited her with. "You care for him, deeply." It wasn't a question, and Abigail didn't bother denying it. The crisis had stripped away pretenses, revealing essential truths. "Yes." "Does he know?" "I'm not certain." The honest admission surprised even Abigail. "We've never spoken of feelings." Victoria's expression softened fractionally. "Men like Sullivan don't risk their lives for just anyone's father. He's going into that tunnel for the Wilkinson children, and for you, their teacher who cares so much about them." After a pause, she added reluctantly, "Thomas was wrong about you. We both were." Before Abigail could respond to this unexpected concession, Caleb approached, now dressed in mining gear with a lantern secured to his belt. The sight of him prepared to enter the unstable tunnel made her heart constrict painfully. "We're ready," he told her, his voice calm but his eyes conveying deeper emotions. "Should take about an hour if all goes according to plan." "And if it doesn't?" The question escaped before she could contain it. "Then I'll improvise." His attempted smile didn't reach his eyes. "Keep water and bandages ready. The men will likely be dehydrated and injured when we bring them out." Abigail nodded, professional concerns providing welcome distraction from personal fears. "Be careful, Caleb. Always am." He hesitated, then added quietly, "If anything happens, don't." She interrupted fiercely. "Nothing will happen. You'll succeed because that's what you do. You make the impossible look straightforward through sheer competence and determination." Something like wonder crossed his features at her absolute faith in him. Then, with a brief nod to Hamilton, who stood nearby, Caleb led his rescue team into the reinforced tunnel entrance, disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow them whole. The next hours were the longest of Abigail's life. She continued assisting Dr. Howard with injured miners, but her attention remained fixed on the tunnel entrance, willing it to disgorge Caleb and the trapped men safely. Around her, the Silvercrest community demonstrated its true character: women bringing food and coffee for the rescue workers, children running messages between the mine and town, men volunteering for dangerous tasks without hesitation. Even Thomas Blackwood worked alongside miners he would normally consider beneath his station, his sleeves rolled up and his hands blistered from hauling timber. The crisis had temporarily erased social distinctions, uniting the town in common purpose. Edward Hamilton observed everything with keen interest, occasionally assisting where needed, but primarily watching the community's response to adversity. Abigail caught him studying her several times, his expression thoughtful rather than critical. "Miss Foster," he said during a brief lull in medical activities, "I believe I've seen quite enough of Silvercrest's educational capacity, and much more of its character than I anticipated. This isn't how I plan to demonstrate our school's effectiveness," she admitted, wiping dust from her forehead with a weary arm. "On the contrary, you've provided the most convincing demonstration possible." Hamilton's stern features relaxed into genuine respect. Education isn't confined to classrooms. It's evident in how a community faces challenges, solves problems, and supports its members. Silvercrest has impressed me today, largely due to the influence of people like you and Sullivan. Before Abigail could process this assessment, a shout went up from the tunnel entrance. All conversation ceased as everyone turned toward the sound. First one figure emerged from the darkness, then another, until a procession of dust-covered men stood blinking in the late afternoon sunlight. The trapped miners had been rescued, all alive, though injured to varying degrees. Abigail scanned the group anxiously until she spotted Caleb, supporting James Wilkinson, whose leg appeared injured. Relief washed through her with such force that she momentarily felt lightheaded. Dr. Howard immediately began examining the rescued men, directing Abigail and other volunteers to assist with cleaning wounds and providing water. "Remarkable," Hamilton murmured beside her as they watched Caleb deliver James to the treatment area. Sullivan's engineering background saved those men. Seems Silvercrest has resources it doesn't properly utilize. The observation struck Abigail as profoundly true. Caleb's talents had been overlooked by most of the community, who saw only the mountain guide rather than the educated man beneath the rugged exterior. How many others in this frontier town possessed hidden depths and untapped potential? As twilight descended and the crisis atmosphere gradually dissipated, Abigail found a moment to approach Caleb, who sat alone on a boulder some distance from the main activity, finally allowing exhaustion to show now that all were safe. "James will recover," she told him, offering a cup of coffee. "Dr. Howard says his leg is broken, but clean, should heal properly with rest." Caleb accepted the coffee gratefully, his hands still bearing traces of tunnel dust despite washing. "Good, his children need him. The whole town needs him and the other miners you saved." Abigail sat beside him, propriety forgotten in the aftermath of crisis. "You were magnificent today, Caleb. Without your engineering knowledge, someone would have figured something out," he deflected, uncomfortable with praise. "No, they wouldn't have." Her certainty was absolute. "You saved 5 lives today through courage and intelligence that most of Silvercrest never bothered to recognize existed beneath your buckskins." He studied her face in the fading light, his blue eyes weary but warm. "You recognized it from the beginning." The simple truth of his statement hung between them, pregnant with meaning that neither had previously acknowledged openly. Today's brush with mortality had stripped away pretense, leaving only essential realities exposed. "Mr. Sullivan." Edward. Hamilton's approach interrupted the moment. "Remarkable work in that tunnel. I understand you studied structural engineering before the war?" Caleb stood respectfully, though his exhaustion was evident. "Yes, sir. Though it's been many years since I put that training to formal use. Until today, when you implemented textbook solutions under life-threatening conditions." Hamilton's assessment was matter-of-fact but appreciative. "I'd like to discuss a proposition with you tomorrow, if you're recovered enough. My company needs someone with your unique combination of skills, formal engineering training, and practical frontier experience." Surprise registered briefly on Caleb's dust-streaked face. "What kind of proposition?" "The railroad requires someone to assess terrain challenges and structural requirements along proposed routes," Hamilton explained. "Someone who understands both technical specifications and wilderness realities. The position would involve extensive travel throughout the territory, with considerable responsibility and compensation to match." It was a remarkable opportunity, recognition of Caleb's education and experience that Silvercrest had never offered. Abigail felt a complex mixture of pride in his being acknowledged and dismay at the implication that such work would take him away from Silvercrest, away from her. "I appreciate the offer," Caleb replied carefully. "I'd like to consider it overnight, if that's acceptable." "Of course." Hamilton nodded understandingly. "I'll call on you tomorrow at your aunt's boarding house." With a respectful nod to Abigail, he departed, leaving an altered landscape of possibilities in his wake. As darkness settled fully over the mind clearing, Abigail and Caleb walked slowly back toward town, both too exhausted for substantial conversation, yet unwilling to separate just yet. The day's events had shifted something fundamental between them, and potentially within Silvercrest itself. "What will you tell Hamilton tomorrow?" Abigail finally asked as they neared Martha's boarding house, the question she had been avoiding since the investor's departure. Caleb's pace slowed further. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's an opportunity I never expected, To use education I thought the war had rendered irrelevant. You'd be wonderful at it, she said sincerely, despite the hollow feeling spreading beneath her ribs. Your knowledge of these mountains is unmatched, and today proved your engineering skills remain sharp. They stopped at the boarding house steps, facing each other in the gentle illumination from windows, where Martha had lit lamps against the gathering darkness. Caleb studied Abigail's face as if memorizing its features. The position would require extensive travel, he said quietly. Weeks, perhaps months away from Silvercrest. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Away from you. You deserve recognition, Abigail replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Silvercrest has taken your contributions for granted far too long. Have you? The simple question cut through pretense, demanding honesty she had carefully avoided providing until now. In the aftermath of near tragedy, such caution suddenly seemed foolish. Never, she whispered. I've seen you clearly from the beginning, more clearly than I've seen anyone before. Something like wonder crossed his tired features. Abigail, Miss Foster, Mr. Sullivan. Martha's voice interrupted as she hurried from the boarding house. Thank God you're both safe. We've been hearing about the mine disaster all evening. She embraced them both with uncharacteristic emotion before drawing back to assess their condition. You need food and rest immediately. Come inside, I've kept supper warm. As they followed Martha inside, Abigail felt the weight of unfinished conversation between them. Caleb's decision about Hamilton's offer remained unmade, and their own relationship hung in a delicate balance, transformed by crisis, but not yet defined by choice. Tomorrow would bring resolution one way or another, for Caleb's career, for the town's future with the railroad, and perhaps most significantly, for the unspoken bond that had grown between a plain schoolteacher and the mountain man, who had seen her true worth from the very beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.